generally, curated content should be chopped down, not built up. What is curated content? Okay, if I create this video and I post it, live stream it even, so that what you see is exactly what I created, that's not curated content. It would be if I had a script from which I was reading in order to, preserve the feeling of spontaneity while at the same time actually having a plan so that I can be confident that what I'm going to deliver in the allotted time frame is what I intended. Curated content would be content that is scripted, rehearsed, edited, polished up with, usually with media, you're talking sound effects, music, things like that, eye candy. So in thinking about this, because of a wealth of topics related to sort of like ego and some of the directions I can drift off into if I just live stream and, spray whatever I think, without preparation, scripting, rehearsal, yada, yada, yada. The content's actually generally pretty good. The problem is I don't like the person that I tend to morph into when I do much of that. Okay, so I sort of went through the experience and decided, tons and tons of live streaming isn't for me. Anyway, so the point is I kind of landed on this thing that curated content makes more sense for me. Well, it occurred to me this morning that curated content should be chopped down, not built up. So what I mean by that is, if you think of it in terms of being built up, what you're thinking is you're gonna stress over having all the right components that are going to come together to create that experience for the consumer or the viewer, whatever. And you want to make sure that they are the right components in the right order, with the right feeling and the right execution. And you basically give yourself this big burden of essentially guessing right about what the right combination is. Now, you can kind of do that if you use templates or follow best practices so that you sort of just wind up creating something that's well established as sort of what people are consuming. My contention here is that if a lot of the juice of the ideas that you're sharing or the content that you're creating comes from this free-flowing, just spraying out like I'm doing right now, then it would be better to spray and then chop that down and let an edited, compact version of that develop organically from the ideas, essentially, is better than thinking in terms of building it up from the bottom up. And the reason for that is that the bottom-up approach essentially gives you a machine gun litany of items which you need to get right. Okay, if you're a normal person like me, wait, me normal? I don't know about that. Then that's fundamentally a stressor. If you're a people pleaser, right? If you worry about getting it right. When you go top down, in essence, is kind of the way I'm thinking of it, you just let it flow, and then you say, okay, that's my starting point. Now what we're going to do is we're going to cut that down, make that concise, and polish that up so that you've maintained the integrity of the free flow of ideas in creating content, but you haven't burdened yourself with, basically, if you do it from the bottom up, what you're doing is you're putting the structure ahead of the content in your thinking. And increasingly, the more I look at that, the more I think that's stupid. So this is what goes wrong in software development. When structure is put ahead of content, that's when you generate a cosmetically beautiful interface for a website or a piece of software that the reason it's cosmetically beautiful is because it just uses a framework that applies the best practices to constructing the structure of the application. And so creating that really good looking cosmetic interface takes literally a minute. You just generate it, done. The problem is in many real world applications. So applications, not in the sense of software applications, but it turns out that if you're wanting to generate eye candy to impress the client or make the sale or whatever, then those tools are kind of useful actually. But they wind up giving you an application that looks gorgeous but is truly useless, truly functionally useless. In fact, worse, what happens is you cobble the functionality into that structure and it doesn't quite work, and then you wind up with all kinds of hacks and workarounds to force your content to fit into a structure that really isn't what, you could say it wants to be. It's always better to start with the ideas. It's better to start with the content. This is another thing actually about, this is where it sort of dovetails into authenticity in being the person that, you're uniquely designed to be, so to speak. If you start with ideas and chop it down, then you are going to organically and naturally reflect the unique ideas and contribution that only you would ever come up with in just the way that you do, right? You've captured your uniqueness, if you will. If you go bottom up, then what you're doing is you're saying, the world says you need to have a meme. The world says you need to have, a 30-second intro with this sort of really new agey music behind it. And you just go down the list of all the things that you've either been told or you've observed the culture and you've surmised that, it's necessary. If I'm going to be heard or be successful or whatever, then I need to do all these things. Well, the reality is if you find even one exception, that proves that you don't need to. Now, it might be helpful. The only reason it's helpful is because culturally, you're giving people what they're accustomed to. And when you're dealing with emotional memory, which is the visceral, response to something, if the structure of it is familiar, that is helpful. It's not definitive, right? It doesn't rule the day necessarily, but it is helpful. So, anyway, what's the bottom line? The bottom line is don't go bottom up. Don't start with structure. Go top down and then chop it down. Start with the ideas, let them flow freely, like I'm doing right here, and then edit. What will happen is your ideas and your structure will emerge naturally. And if as you do that, you say, well, I want to adhere to best practices in sort of creating the packaging for this thing I'm doing. Great, do that. That's your choice, right? But if you start from the bottom up, you're just starting with structure, and now you're just trying to plug things into, plug the square peg into the square hole, and you not only potentially give yourself a lot of stress and a lot of work to do that you're not even sold emotionally on why this is necessary, right? Because it's not driven by the ideas. But not only that, you are literally creating cookie cutter content that is potentially muting your uniqueness in a way that you really didn't want to do.